Welcome in. It's another brand new edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast. It is the 2024 Year in Review edition of the 901 Soccer Podcast, and I'm your host, Lawrence Dockery. You can find me on Twitter at LDoc93. You can find the 901 Soccer Podcast on Twitter at 901 Soccer Pod. You can find us on Facebook as well. Just search 901 Soccer and search Bluff City Media, as of course the 901 Soccer Podcast is part of the Bluff City Media umbrella. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you, of course, could and should definitely like the video, comment on the video, and subscribe to the channel, because here at Bluff City Media, we're not just giving you soccer stuff, although in Memphis, I do try to be the voice of soccer in the city and encourage all of you to continue to watch these and read the written content. But it's not just soccer at Bluff City Media. There's plenty of Tigers and Grizzlies and any number of other Memphis sports topics. So what we got for you today is just a year in review. We did one of these last year. I think it went very well. It was very well received, very well viewed, I guess you could say. So I figured that's what we're going to do today. We are going to be talking about, last year we talked about four things. We talked about 901 FC, the Americans, the Memphis Women, and the Memphis Men. Unfortunately, maybe fortunately, the Memphis Americans no longer existed after they went on hiatus in 2023, because minor league indoor soccer teams that go on hiatus always definitely come back. And so now this year, we've only got three things to talk about. We got Memphis 901 FC, and we have the University of Memphis women's team and University of Memphis men's team. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, there's not going to be able to get around the obvious part about Memphis 901 FC no longer being here, but we're going to talk about the season that they had, because these are all memories, these are all things that happened. So we're going to talk about that. We'll get into the U of M women's team. We'll get into the U of M men's team, just kind of all around. Basically from November on, 2024 sucked. The last 2 months of soccer and the last 2 months of the calendar year of 2024 were not good for soccer in Memphis. So we'll just go ahead and move on to Memphis 901 FC. And from 2023 to 2024, they moved from the Eastern Conference USL Championship to the Western Conference USL Championship. And the questions at the time were, why? There's nothing really Western about Memphis. Memphis is east of the Mississippi River. They're on it, but they're east. They're on the eastern bank, not the western bank. This is because the two teams from the Western Conference of the USL Championship folded or were shut down. That was after the 23 season. That was the San Diego Loyal and Rio Grande Valley. And they were adding two new teams into the Eastern Conference. That ended up being North Carolina FC and Rhode Island. And so I'll give the league credit for this. The two most Eastern Conference teams, they did move to the Western Conference. So that at least made some sort of sense. Sucked for us because it meant a lot of late nights, very few watch parties, though I have my doubts that those would have been done regardless if they had been in the Eastern Conference or the Western Conference. More on that later. And so just the move I wasn't super thrilled about the move to the West, but it wasn't the end of the world. It just meant fewer options for fans to travel to and that sort of thing. Luckily, you still had a game on the road in Birmingham. We'll talk about that in a second. But, 2024 on the field was a pretty good year for Memphis 901 FC. They had a really good offseason, and you can go back and find the tweets and find the podcast. I was banging the drum that this was the best offseason that Memphis 901 FC had ever had for a number of reasons. You got year two of Stephen Glass, and B, they started building the roster for the team before the 23 USL season was even over. I think the playoffs were still going on, and they were announcing, hey, here's who's leaving, here's the guys from this team that are coming back, and then late December, early January, boom, 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 new guy. Every 3 or 4 days, they were announcing a new signing. So that was really impressive. That's not something we had ever seen from them before. So that was something that I was very appreciative of. You also look at the fact that they created a new position and hired Jay Mims to be the COO. Ultimately, he did not stay in that position the entire season, but I thought that it kind of signaled that the ownership group and the organization were starting to take things more seriously than they had, and we were getting a more competent, more well-run, more professional soccer team. And I think the results on the field really kind of bore that out. Even though they started rough, they had an interesting preseason. I liked that they played the U of M at South Campus. I liked that they had scheduled CBU. Unfortunately, I don't remember exactly the reason. I think there were some player eligibility issues, which is why the CBU game got canceled. I asked around at 901 FC, and they're like, this didn't come from us. Like, we wanted to play that game, and they just said, hey, we can't do it. Then you played at Nashville SC preseason game. You opened the preseason at Atlanta, except it was at the UGA in Athens at their soccer stadium, which was kind of cool. And you did well. You went unbeaten in the preseason. Couple of draws against MLS teams, beat a college team, that sort of thing. So that was a decent preseason. You got the season off on the right foot with a win against Las Vegas, who ended up being a pretty damn good soccer team this year for the first time in their existence. And then you hit like a 5, 6, 7 game stretch where you lost every game. So that was a little bit concerning. It was a little bit frustrating and kind of disheartening, but all the credit in the world to Stephen Glass and Caleb Patterson-Sewell, and all the credit in the world to those players for sticking with it and not getting their heads down and knowing what they had, knowing the system they were going to be running was going to work, sticking with it, and it eventually paying dividends. It was one, I've made the point, Lord knows how many times, that the old saying is never too high after a win, never too low after a loss. And I've tried that, and it doesn't work for me. And when things are going well, it's hell yeah, we're never losing again, winning the title, we're winning all the trophies. And when we're losing, it's everybody stinks, fire the coach, fire the GM, fire the owner, sell the team, get rid of everybody, get rid of the players, shut it down, start over. That's not necessarily the most healthy or the best or most professional way to go about it, but that's just a way that my brain is wired, and I'm not going to apologize for that. So it was a little bit difficult, but I don't know how many of you out there are familiar with what's called the sunken cost theory, where you spend so much time and energy and emotional capital thinking one thing that your brain does not allow you to admit that that's, even when all the evidence says otherwise, your brain does not allow you to admit that you were wrong because you have spent so much time and emotional capital being wrong. Your brain just says, no, I'm not wrong. I was sort of like the gambler's fallacy, right? Everybody knows that guy that goes to the casino. You go to Southland, you go down to Tunica, you put 100 in and then lose it in 2 minutes, and you put another one in and lose it again, and you just keep pouring them in there because eventually it's going to hit, right? Eventually you're going to make all your money back. A little bit like that. So I had a little bit of sunken cost theory going on, or my concern was that I had a little bit of sunken cost theory going on with 901 FC when they lost 5 or 6 games in a row early on in the season, because I had spent a lot of time and effort and energy hyping up the team and talking about how awesome of a season it was going to be. And then you go out and win the first one, but then you lose 6 or 7 in a row. And I'm fairly confident that you can go back to some of the early episodes of the podcast this season. And if I remember correctly, my line was, we're going to stick with this for now, but if it gets to be the end of May and it still looks like this, then we're in trouble, and then it's time to panic. Luckily, we didn't have to wait till the end of May for things to turn around, because the players and the coaches stuck with it and didn't panic and trusted the process. They went down on the road to Birmingham, which I was fortunate enough to go down and cover. Fortunate because it was a new stadium and a new experience, and the third time I got to cover to travel the team on the road. That was the fact that the team won made it all the more worthwhile. That is a terribly run outfit down there. I don't know who's responsible for running the stadium, whether it's the Legion, whether it's the stadium itself, whether it's UAB or the whatever county or municipal authority that runs stuff in Birmingham. Whoever's running that stadium, they do not, I've said it before and I'll say it again, they do not know their elbow from their asshole. And I'm talking basic stuff here, guys. I'm not talking like I need to get to this place to talk to this person at this time. It's, where is this? and 10 different people told me 10 different things. Almost took an act of Congress to get to the visitors' locker room after the game. Some of the players and some of the coaches were of the same mind as me as far as the operation down there. But did get to go down on the road and cover that game, and 901 FC put a hurt on them, which was kind of cathartic for the club if you think about it, because going to Birmingham and especially going to Protective Stadium, that was a place where 901 FC routinely got their skulls caved in, including in the Open Cup last year. And it was very refreshing not to just go in there and win, but to leave no doubt. Like from the first minute to the 90th minute, there was never a doubt at any point, anywhere in that game, who was going to win that game. So that was awesome. And that's when the turnaround happened. And I don't think, not so coincidentally, you had a number of good players on the roster and everybody was doing their bit, but Marlon Santos broke out in that game and then was awesome in the month of May. I think he was the USL Championship Player of the Month for May. I remember at the open practice that 901 FC, Stephen Glass said, if there's anybody in the league that's had a better month, he doesn't know who it is. And I mean, they were scoring goals for fun. They beat Pittsburgh. I remember they beat Tampa. Like, they beat some really good teams. They had some really good wins. And, you know, they didn't have quite as long of an unbeaten stretch as they did in 2023, you know, where they went, I think, like 12 or 13 games unbeaten in 2023. This one wasn't quite as long, but they also didn't have that fall off. If you remember in 2023, I think they went the entire month of July and like half of August without a win. And a number of those losses were fairly comprehensive, discouraging, ice pick to back of Leon Trotsky's skull type losses. And that was frustrating, but that didn't happen this year. And I think you can go back, and I made this point a number of times, you can go back to the start of the season, you can go back to the offseason, to 901 FC Media Day in March, and the point that Stephen Glass made, Caleb Patterson-Sewell made, that Leston Paul made, was it's going to be a small group. We don't have the budget that these other teams have, but these are guys that want to be here, and these are guys that are going to fight and scrap and claw, and there's going to be no quit in this team. And I think you include the regular season, the preseason, the Open Cup, which we'll talk about in a second, and the playoffs. There are 38, 39 Memphis 901 FC games this year. And I think there was only one game where you could even make the argument that there was quit on the team, and that was at Orange County when they lost 4-1. And I don't even know if it was so much as quit. I heard some behind-the-scenes stuff about the nightmare that was getting out to that Orange County game, so that made a little bit more sense when I heard that. But that was different than last year. There was a 2 or 3 game stretch where it was concerning. And I think the fact that you didn't have that this year really just speaks volumes about the culture. And that's something that everybody in every sport, every organization anywhere in the world uses. And it gets so overused. But culture and quality of character were paramount for the 2024 Memphis 901 FC. And it turned up in spades. It really did. This was a group that battled their asses off night in and night out, and there was no quit in the team, and it showed. They won a game in the U.S. Open Cup. For 3 times in 4 U.S. Open Cup appearances, Memphis 901 FC advanced. Unfortunately, they came up short in the second round of the Open, or whatever round it was, their second game of the Open Cup. They lost on the road at FC Dallas, but that was a game where, you know, you do what on paper inferior teams do. I don't think that's outrageous to suggest that a USL Championship team is inferior to that of an MLS team. But you sat back and absorbed pressure and looked to hit them on the counter. And they were able to successfully absorb pressure for 70. A little momentary switch off, and MLS players are going to take that chance, and they did. And Memphis 901 FC lost 1-0. Not an impressive showing, but nothing to be ashamed of. They did not the best way to say that. Let me rephrase that. Not a good result, but a decent, professional, impressive showing. Then they just came up short against a better team, I think is probably the best way to say that. But the results on the field, you know, you advance in the Open Cup, you get all the way to your final couple of games, and you've locked up a playoff spot with 2 games to go, and you look at the calendar and you're like, we've got 2 more games this season, and we need to win both games to lock up a home playoff spot for the 3rd straight season. Well, who are those games against? They're both on the road, and they're at Phoenix, the reigning USL champions, and then you're at New Mexico United, the number 1 team in the conference, who also advanced far in the Open Cup and knocked off an MLS team on the way. So you go out to Phoenix, you win that game, and you're like, yes, one more game. That's all. One more game. And your hope going into that game is that New Mexico United has already locked up the playoff spot. They've already locked up the number 1 seed throughout the playoffs. Maybe they're going to be not as switched on. And I don't want to see took it to them. I think Lucas Turchi had a goal of the year candidate. Somebody had a goal of the year candidate in that game. But credit to New Mexico, they did not take their foot off the accelerator. They did not just try to coast into the playoffs, and they battled, and I don't want to see it was just a better team on the night. And it came down to needing to hang on tooth and nail in the last seconds of the game. And that made for it was pucker up time if you were watching on the couch at home. And they found a way, and I don't want to see found a way to get it done. And they got a home playoff game for the 3rd straight year. And this was something that had not occurred to me until Caleb Patterson-Sewell mentioned it at the immediate availability prior to the home playoff game, that I don't want to see the only team in the league to finish in the top 4 of their respective conference 3 straight years. And on the surface, I'm like, no way, Louisville City. They go to the Eastern Conference Finals every year. But then I remembered we hosted Louisville City in 2023 as the 4 seed, so that meant they were the 5 seed. So mega impressive. I mean, you want to talk about doing more with less, which is not to disparage the quality or the character or the effort of any of the players on this team, but this was a recurring theme for Memphis 901 FC under Tim Mulqueen, and then under Ben Pierman, and then under Stephen Glass. They don't have the budget. Whether that's because they just didn't have the money or didn't want to spend the money, I think that's something that I would like to say is in the eye of the beholder, even though that's something that could vary. There are probably very easy, concrete facts to determine whether they had money and didn't want to spend it or just didn't have money. And that's not information that we'll ever really be privy to. But you know, it was a theme in 2022, especially under Ben Pierman, where it's like, we don't have a big budget, we don't have a big roster, but we've got character, and we're going to find ways to win games. And they were the number 2 team in the Eastern Conference and won a home playoff game. Same thing in 23 and 24, and especially 2024 under Steve Glass. Not a big budget, not a big roster, but we're going to find ways to win a lot of soccer games, and they did. And so that's very impressive, and they deserve all the credit in the world for that. And that is especially that makes the 3 straight years of top 4 finishes all the more impressive. The fact that you're doing more, you are having great finishes every year, despite the fact that you have one of the lowest budgets in the league. Mega impressive. You talk about it all the time in college football, where it's coach them up. That's coaching them up right there. So you get into the playoffs, you're hosting another home playoff game, so it's exciting there. And it's an 11 a.m. kickoff, which was a little bit strange, but you were also you were hoping on the body clock theory, right? Team from West Coast goes east, has early East Coast start time, which means body clock for West Coast team thinks it's 8 o'clock in the morning when you're not used to actually having to be 100% to play a playoff soccer game. Unfortunately, that did not come to fruition. Was really hoping this was a team that I thought they could beat. Like, I thought you had the momentum going into the playoffs. You had won. You had basically been in playoff mode for several games, and you got them at home. And we were banking on the old college basketball theory of it's hard to beat the same team 3 times in one season. So we were banking on that. It was at home, body clock theory, and it was a tense, tough, cagey. It was a playoff game. Usually when the stakes are a lot higher, the soccer is not as pretty and free-flowing. And that was the case against Orange County in the playoffs. And you have this player sent off in like the 75th, 80th minute, and you're like, this is a problem. This might be a problem getting into extra time. And you get into extra time, and you are weathering the storm very, very, very well. And it comes back to the mentality and the culture of the team. Because, I mean, it's very easy. Not a lot of time left. We've been battling all day. We're worn out. These guys aren't giving an inch. We just had somebody sent off for a clothesline elbow to the throat. And now we're a man down, and it's going to be tough sledding from here. So in that situation, it's very easy to put your head down and just mail it in, and they didn't do that. And they had a couple of halfway decent chances to win it, and unfortunately, Orange County took that chance. And that was devastating because there wasn't a lot of time left in the game, and that's probably the end of the season. But it was doubly devastating because I know the coaches, and I know I felt that if you got past extra time, still tied, despite being a man down, that you were going to win in penalties. Because mentally, Orange County was going to be thinking they shouldn't have been there. Up a man for basically 45 minutes, and you couldn't score, and you're going to penalties. Like, I don't know who the 901 FC penalty takers would have been, but I just feel like mentally, like that was like it was going to be 901 FC's day if it got the penalties. That was what I was thinking. Like, it's you have that, you had momentum going into the game, and then within the game, you weathered that storm, and now anything is possible. And you also would have had I don't know if it's a complicating factor, but I don't know how many of you are familiar with the concept of reduce to equate, which is where if you have had a player sent off during the course of the game, the team with 11 players must take a player off when you get to the penalty shootout so that you have an equal number of penalty takers, right? Because you cannot retake a penalty. A player cannot retake a kick unless you have gotten through all 11 takers. So you can't have 10v11 in a shootout because that would be wonky. So you have to take 11 to get down to 10. Now, I've only ever seen a penalty shootout once in my entire life at the professional level go all 11 kickers. And if I'm not mistaken, it was Portland v. Kansas City in the wild card round in the 2015 MLS Cup playoffs. But that was, 901 FC didn't make it to penalties, and they lost in regulation. And little did we know that the heartbreak of that would be compounded to the 100th degree like 2 weeks later when it was announced that 901 FC was packing up shop and leaving town and moving to Santa Barbara. Nominally, it was because there was no stadium deal. And we have the Memphis Grizzlies to thank for that. And some of you may not like that or may be frustrated. And yes, I completely understand. And this was something that I banged the drum about. It is incredibly hard to justify $65 million for a 7,500 seat soccer stadium when your average attendance is in the gutter with 2,800 people a game. I understand that. That was a charge that I had been leading for quite some time. But for anyone to suggest that the Memphis Grizzlies were negotiating for the use of those stadium funds in good faith, if you legitimately believe that, I have concern about your mental well-being and concern about your grip on reality. I don't want to belabor this point because there's no point in belaboring the point. It sounded like a Dr. Seuss rhyme. Nominally, yes. No stadium deal equals bye-bye 901 FC. I also think that if it was the USL who made this decision, I have no idea who made this decision because nobody would tell me anything. It was kind of frustrating, and I say kind of, I mean very frustrating, to me personally, that a national writer who has nothing to do with Memphis was the one who broke the story and not me. And normally I don't care to be like first, which is one of the things that drives me crazy. If the best way that I've ever heard it put was the Giannotto and Jeffrey show on 92.9 used to make the point that guys like Adam Schefter in the NFL and Woj and Shams in the NBA and Jeff Passan in MLB, they're always the first to report it, but they're not really news breakers. They're news brokers. It's so like, I've never been concerned with like being the first to report something. I always knew I was going to be the first one to report something for 901 FC because I'm the only one who reported anything on 901 FC anyway. John Varlas notwithstanding. But it makes me think that maybe 901 FC wasn't the one who made this decision. For whatever the flaws and faults of the ownership group, and there were a lot of them, I have no idea if they were the one that made this decision or not. If they were, then to hell with them for not at least letting me know this so that I could properly report it in a way that Memphians could understand. And it's not someone on the outside. And this is not any slander or slight at Tom Bogert. And when I saw that he was the one who reported it, he is a very well-respected, very reputable national writer. So this was not something that was just like, oh, internet rumor mill. No, I'm like, well, if that's who's saying it, this is happening. This is not something where there's going to be like an 11th hour miracle or anything like that. This is happening. So my suspicion, I have no way to confirm or deny this because when I started firing off text calls and emails to people with that at 901 FC, it was radio silence, like I didn't exist, like I wasn't the only person who covered them for 6 years. My suspicion is that this was the league making this move because they have that sort of official but sort of unofficial mandate where it's like, hey, by the 2026 World Cup, everybody's in their own stadium. Okay. And I kind of thought 901 FC was going to be granted a stay of execution until the end of the 25 season because they had a plan on paper until, March of 24, February, March of 24. So I thought we were going to get at least one more year. But my suspicion is that the league made this move because the attendance sucked. It got worse every single year. No hiding that. Try as I did and try as you did to make it better and try it. They finally started trying this year. And a lot of the stuff they did, I was a big fan of. You created a new COO position. You had season ticket holder events like the jersey reveal. You handed out magnet schedules, which I thought were fantastic. And I did a little bit of ambush marketing on my own with some of those magnet schedules that I was able to snag and take home. You got your ass out to Mike Rose. Finally, you were out there consistently and for longer than an hour. You did the open practice. You did the coaches clinic. You had 2 different watch parties, one of which was open to the public, and unfortunately while I was out of town, and one of which was another season ticket holder event. So they did a lot of stuff. They started working on selling season tickets in like September of 23 or 24 for the 25 season. There were people that were the day before the team moved. They were getting calls that they were trying to get you to buy season tickets, which just kind of also speaks to this either confirms that 901 FC ownership was just awful and wasn't going to tell anybody, or that this was made by the league. And I think that this was made by the league. Because there's other teams in this league that are still playing in baseball stadiums that are drawing a lot better than Memphis 901 FC. My suspicion is that Memphis 901 FC was drawing between 5,000 and 6,000 fans a game. They would be here in 2025. That's my suspicion. I have nothing in writing. I have nothing in text. I have no sourcing, no information, no insiders, no nothing to suggest that that's the case. But that's where my brain takes me. That is what my intuition tells me. Because you look at El Paso, and they have never not been terrible, but they draw 5,000 or 6,000 people a game. So they play in a baseball stadium, but they're not getting shut down or moved. Also, Santa Barbara. I've been to Santa Barbara, California twice in my life, in 2018 and 2022. And there's nothing really to write home about other than it's like 20 minutes from the beach. So, whatever. But I don't know, man. It was a bummer. I don't know who made the decision. I know nominally it was the decision because of no stadium. Something tells me that even without the stadium, we could have had at least one more year if the crowds had been better. That's where I'm at. And I'm going to miss covering this team. I know a lot of you are going to miss going to those games. And it sucks, and it's a bummer. But they're gone now, and there's really nothing we can do about it other than maybe hope that professional soccer comes back in in 5 or 6 years. I don't want, like, you can go back and check out the podcast I did a couple weeks ago. I don't want professional soccer back anytime soon. I would like it back eventually. I don't want it back right now because that wouldn't be fair and it wouldn't feel right, if that makes sense. So I don't know. Let's move on. I think this is a point that has been made far too many times already. 901SC's gone, and we are going to miss them. So who else do we have to talk about here, soccer-wise, in the Memphis area? Well, the most successful program on the campus at the University of Memphis is the University of Memphis women's soccer team. And they got their season off to a great start. Brooks Monaghan won his 300th game as University of Memphis women's coach. We were there for that. And then shortly thereafter, unfortunately, we were not there for this. My regular job came into play and I was attending a conference, but they announced that they will be getting a completely renovated stadium and brand new locker rooms, team room, meeting area, film room, boot room, all that stuff. And that is being made possible by a generous donation from Liza Fletcher's family. If we all remember, unfortunately, the passing of Liza Fletcher, which unfortunately was another black guy from Memphis on the national scene. And I did not know this at the time. I, of course, was aware of the happenings of it. And I did not know at the time that Liza Fletcher had played for Brooks Monaghan at the University of Memphis. And I remember you can go back and check, we did a one-on-one sit-down on-camera interview with Brooks Monaghan, which you can check out here on Bluff City Media, where, you ask Brooks, it's like, you were on the road with the team. How do you prepare yourself for telling your team that this was one of them? This could very easily have been one of them. This was a former University of Memphis women's soccer player that this happened to. And, that was not a good time for the city of Memphis, but out of the darkness comes light, and it's called Liza's Light. And if anybody is deserving of better and newer facilities, it is the women's soccer program at the University of Memphis. They have gone to a number of NCAA tournaments. What do we have here? I've got my article pulled up because I always get the numbers wrong. This doesn't make for very good radio, but you'll just have to bear with me. Coming into the 2024 season, the University of Memphis women's soccer team had gone to 6 straight NCAA tournaments and 7 of the past 8. They had won 3 straight conference titles in 4 of their last 6. They had been to back-to-back Sweet 16s. They had advanced in 3 straight NCAA tournaments. They had broken several attendance records out at the track and soccer stadium. Coming into this year, they had a record of 114 wins, 34 losses, and 17 draws. That's a 74% win percentage. But like I said, Brooks Monaghan won his 300th game. So if anybody was deserving of newer and better facilities, it's the women's soccer team at the University of Memphis. And it was something that we touched on with Coach Monaghan in that interview, which I, again, highly recommend that you check out, this was a project that had been in the works under the previous athletic department administration under Laird Veach. And then he left, and you had a new athletic director come in, and Ed Scott. So that was something that almost feels like, is the rug going to get pulled out from under us, or are they going to back us on this? And I've said it before on Twitter. I've said it before on a podcast that we did with Kenny Stubblefield here on Bluff City Media, and I'll say it again. Ed Scott is probably the best person that the University of Memphis could hire as their athletic director. That is a dude that is selling all of the programs all of the time. I mean, that dude is a machine in all the best way to say that. So hearing that he was 100% behind helping the University of Memphis continue to make this push to get a new and improved soccer stadium was very good to hear. I've seen Ed Scott out there at several of the University of Memphis and University of Memphis women's and men's games. So he's there, he's watching, he's aware of what's going on out there. And I don't know if anybody knows this. If you've been to the games, you've seen it, but you might not know, like the locker room that they have is teeny tiny. It's like a construction site trailer is what it is, which is quite frankly embarrassing. And it's good to see that is being rectified. Now, on the field, they had a very good year this year. You lost a lot from last year. Last year was a very senior-heavy team. You even had Maya Jones, your captain, your senior, your starter, your captain. Maya Jones was drafted in the, I think, third round of the NWSL draft. So, like, you lost a lot from last year's team. Last year's team was like 18-2 with a conference regular season, division title, regular season title, and a conference tournament title, and a Sweet 16 appearance. 18-2 record. Your only two losses were on the road at a ranked Alabama team that had gone to the College Cup semis the year before, and then in the Sweet 16 against a ranked Pitt team. Those were your only two losses the year before. So you've really got nowhere to go but down. And I'll give them credit. Coach Monaghan always continues to find a way to keep the standard high, which is impressive. Their record this year, not as good as it was last year, but still a pretty good record. Excuse me, last year they were 20-2, not 18-2. I forgot to add the two NCAA tournament games. This year they had a record of, let me see, I had it floating around. They were 13-2-4. That's 13 wins, 2 losses, 4 draws. You had a number of wins over power conference opponents. They went on the road and beat Ole Miss. They went on the road and beat Missouri. They beat Iowa State, and they beat Kansas State at home. Did any of those teams end up being particularly good? No. But theoretically, the way that the power structure in college athletics looks at a program like Memphis, non-power conference, not supposed to beat power conference teams because they're, in the minds of the powers that be, Memphis is way down here, and all these super duper special programs are way up here. And Memphis Wheaton beat 4 of them. And their only regular season loss was at Tennessee, a power conference opponent who went to the NCAA tournament. And then I started to get concerned on the day of the AAC title game when Jonah Dillon from the Commercial Appeal started to suggest that they need to win this to get in. I'm thinking, no. They've been a top 25 team all year. They've only got 1 loss. Surely a loss in the conference title game isn't going to hurt that much. Then they lost in the conference title game, and it was like, now they've got 2 losses, but they got 13 wins. They've been ranked all season. You're not going to get a home NCAA tournament game. You're probably not going to get a very high seed, especially considering that at 18-1 last year, they were a 6 seed, which was just asinine. And you can go back and check the 901 Soccer Podcast episode from that. I was a little bit heated, safe to say. But I started to get nervous. Then you went back and looked at it, and you're like, you know what? What might hurt them is 2 things. And you can I wrote an article about this. It's on the Bluff City Media website. You can go check it out. There's 2 things that I think that hurt them the most. One, not as much, but they had to cancel the game against UT Martin. Now, that's one of those bye games, and it's when you can automatically chalk up a W because I don't think Memphis has lost to UT Martin since the 90s, and just last year they beat them, I think, 4 or 5-0. So that was one that you could – and is a win over UT Martin really going to sway whoever is in charge of picking the women's NCAA tournament soccer field? No. But 14 wins looks better than 13 wins in the column. So that's one thing that hurt. That game had to get canceled just because it had rained for like 4 days nonstop. And I was out refereeing at we played at Mike Rose. They did not play at the U of M, unfortunately. And so that one hurt. But what I think what really hurt them more than the canceled game against Utah was they had 2 home draws. And they had won. They had like a home winning streak that had gone back like 2 or 3 years, like winning streak, not just unbeaten. They hadn't lost a game at home in I don't know how long. But they had a very impressive home winning streak dating back, I think, probably to 2021 or 22, maybe. But they dropped a couple of games that they had pretty much dominated and really had no business conceding. And it was a home draw against Tulsa, if I'm not mistaken. And then it was a home draw against East Carolina, who they ended up losing to in the AAC tournament, and a home draw against Tulsa in the regular season finale. And I think if you win both of those games, you're looking at even without the UT Martin, you're looking at 15-1 or 15-2-2. And I think at that point, you probably get it as an at-large. Again, I don't think you're probably getting a home, because apparently the bar for the only way that the University of Memphis women's team is going to get home NC tournament games and high seeds is to just go undefeated against all power competition. Like apparently that's what I'm for. The conclusion that I am forced to draw is that's what's going to have to happen. Which there's no reason that they can't, but that's an insanely ridiculous, absurd level, such higher bar than, Tennessee. Teams like Ohio State get into the NCAA tournament with a 9-8-5 record. Like, the hell? Which is hilarious because college soccer, much as I'm trying, and it's a podcast that you can go check out, is not one that's going to bring the dollars. So why not let more deserving lower conference teams in? Anyway, what the hell? I digress. But I think it was the loss of a surefire home win to UT against home team Martin, the cancellation of that game, and then 2 draws that should have been wins where you're up late and concede for no good reason. And those were 2 games where I think Brooks Monaghan saw the writing on the wall with those 2 home draws because he was not happy in the postgame after those games. One of them, I'm fairly certain he said, draws are like losses for us. And, they've been successful enough for long enough that they've earned the right to say that. So really a bummer. And quite frankly, it's asinine that they didn't get in, asinine on the part of the NCAA. What else is new when it comes to Tigers athletics? But win-loss record, still a very good year. They had a number of really good crowds out there. And they're getting a new stadium and a new locker room. And I don't know when the physical, when dirt starts getting moved, when stuff starts getting knocked down, and when stuff starts getting put up, I don't know. But I hope it gets started before next season so that, within a year or two, it's good to go. You want to talk about also, they redid the baseball stadium right there. They're redoing the Liberty Bowl, and now you're getting a new soccer stadium. So it's very interesting times, athletic facility-wise, going on at the University of Memphis. And so that moves us to the University of Memphis men's team. They are not as successful as the University of Memphis women's team, but they have done. Coach Mulrooney has gotten it rolling the last couple of years. I don't know if necessarily rolling, but they've had a good number of years. I think prior to Coach Mulrooney's arrival, they had been to the NCAA tournament twice ever, and not more recently than 2004. So it had, when Coach Mulrooney got hired, it had been a decade, and then by the time they went back, it had been almost 20 years. But they went in 22, and they went again in 23. They hosted in 23 against SIU Edwardsville, and they drew over 1,000 people for that game. And so going into 24, you looked at the schedule, and it wasn't their Coach Monaghan and Coach Mulrooney scheduled very differently. Coach Mulrooney did not have any power conference opponents on the schedule. So just you get stuck in football brain, and you start thinking these are games that they should win. Central Arkansas, Evansville, SIU, Edwardsville, Northern Illinois, Georgia, Mercer, Georgia State, and you're just in football brain mode. You're going win, 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 win. But one of the problems that the Coach Mulrooney's team had this year was they got gutted by the transfer portal. I think they had 19 new players on the roster this year, and that's a challenge. That is a challenge. Just pure chemistry-wise. Like, you're going to go 19 new players. I mean, there may be 1 or 2 or 3 holdovers from last year. One of the guys that you hated to lose was Leonardo Rodriguez dos Santos, who went to Marshall, who went and played for a national championship this year. And they had a lead in the title game very late in the game. So losing a lot of players, and especially a player of that caliber, that hurt. But the schedule, again, football brain, was looking at it was not any sort of murderer's row. Unfortunately, they got off to a horrendous start. Horrendous. Like we talked about 901 FC, they won their first game and then dropped 5 or 6 in a row. University of Memphis men's team did not win their first game, and they lost like 5 out of their first 6. A lot of those at home against non-power. A lot of those against teams from leagues that are theoretically lower than the American. So that was disconcerting. But then, not dissimilar from last year, they went on the road and beat a top 10 Missouri State team, and that like flipped the switch, and they just like were running through people after that. And they got to host a home conference tournament game, and they won that in just amazing dramatic fashion against USF. So this year, they went on the road and they won a couple games. They got a draw here or there, and they started to figure it out and get it together. And then they hosted a top 10 Charlotte team, and they beat them. And that was like, whoa, Nelly. And then you started looking at it, and once they got into conference play, they were a very good team. And then next thing you know, they have won the AAC regular season title, which means they're the number 1 seed in the AAC tournament, so they get a bye. And then they host the semifinal, and the final is played here regardless of whether they're in it or not. So I'm thinking, like, cowabunga, this is awesome. And at this point in the calendar, the University of Memphis women have already been snubbed from the NCAA tournament, so we're all down about that. And this comes on the heels of 901 FC announcing that they're leaving. So at that point, it was like Princess Leia in Star Wars. Help us, Coach Mulrooney. You're our only hope. Unfortunately, they did not win their home conference tournament game. And I feel bad because I missed it, because after one of the last regular season games, I had told Coach Mulrooney, I was like, if y'all get a home conference tournament game, I'm there. And they got a home conference tournament game, and I wasn't there. That was my regular job, once again, coming into play. And I love my regular job, and I was attending a different conference, and I learned a lot and had a blast and got to mingle and mix and schmooze, and something that I feel like I excel at. And so I'm glad that I got to go to conference. I just hate that I had to miss the home conference tournament game for the men's team. And so I was able to go to the AAC tournament final out at South Campus, because that was on a Sunday, and I was back. And unfortunately, it did not involve the University of Memphis, but it was Charlotte and FIU, and that was a great soccer game. That was a very, very good game. And that Charlotte team, I think even if Memphis had beaten FIU, you knew it was going to be a tough task to beat that Charlotte team, because those guys were ruthless, and they had an incredible killer instinct. And they went to the NCAA tournament. They ultimately lost to NC State in overtime, but that was one they could have very easily won. And it's just the highs and lows of sports. They beat FIU in overtime. In college soccer, overtime is golden goal. So they beat FIU in overtime in the AAC tournament final at South Campus, and they lost in overtime in the first round of the NCAA tournament against NC State. You want to go from highest of highs to lowest of lows. That's a tough one. But all in all, nothing for Coach Mulrooney's squad to turn their nose up at, especially considering how rough the start was. You won an AAC. Both the University of Memphis men and University of Memphis women won the AAC regular season title. So, I mean, I guess it's kind of, if you, depending on how you want to look at it, you could say the AAC in soccer, men's and women's, runs through Memphis. There's not as many teams in the AAC in men's soccer, and that's a real interesting little caveat in all of this, is that a lot of your big-time college athletics programs don't have men's soccer programs, particularly in the SEC. And my understanding is that it's somewhat of a Title IX issue, where you have all of these football players on scholarship, and you got to have the same number of male and female athletes. So you're going to cut men's soccer. You're going to cut a lot of this came from during COVID. Programs that all these people wanted to do away with entirely after forever, COVID gave them the excuse to do. Appalachian State's the one that comes to mind there. But this brings up an interesting question. Now that there is no professional soccer here in Memphis, what does soccer in Memphis look like? And it's my opinion that all of the soccer supporters in the city need to get out to South Campus on a regular basis and support the men's and women's teams at the University of Memphis. That's what I think. I have a variety of reasons for thinking that. One, because, the 901 Soccer Podcast and my role at Bluff City Media is going to be dramatically reduced now that there's no professional team to cover. That's just the reality of it. I appreciate the folks at Bluff City Media for sticking with me and saying, hey, you do a great job. You're not going anywhere. And I appreciate that. I have no plans on going anywhere. I don't want to see is gone, but I am still here. So I am going to be out there as often as possible covering the Memphis men's and women's teams. And you should be out there supporting the Memphis and men's women's teams. And this ties into, this is a nice little cut in a promo that you can go back and check an episode of the 901 Soccer Podcast, which we recorded before the 901 FC news broke, but did not get posted until after. So that was an interesting little timeline there. It's my belief that college soccer is the perfect vehicle for getting non-soccer fans into soccer. And you can do that because a college soccer team is already a brand that you're familiar with. You might be a Memphian and you might not be a soccer fan, but you're a University of Memphis fan. You go to the Liberty Bowl every Saturday. You go to FedEx Forum on the weeknights to watch Tigers, right? And sometimes you go to El Marone Fieldhouse or out to FedEx Park to watch baseball. Why not get out to South Campus and support the soccer teams at the University of Memphis? Because they're fun to watch. The games are free. Concessions are reasonably priced. These are programs that deserve your respect and support. And so if you're not a soccer fan and you want to kind of maybe get into soccer, because as the soccer guy, I cannot tell you the number of times whenever there's during the World Cup or the Olympics or Euros or whatever throughout history, people that aren't into soccer will come up to me and go, well, who should I cheer for? What team should I support? Where can I? We got two really good teams out at the University of Memphis. You're already a Tigers fan, right? Yeah, get out and support them. And if you're a soccer fan in Memphis and you supported 901 FC and you supported the Americans and you supported the Rogues back in the day or Memphis City back in the day, and you have the itch and you need that itch scratch, go out and support the programs at the U of M. Like I said, it's free. Like you can't get any better than free. And it's a good product because they win more than they lose. That's just what I think. That's my line of thinking. And hopefully, you can go and check. So I'm not going anywhere. The podcast will still exist. There might not be any 901 FC, but we're still going to be talking U of M. And I've got a couple of interesting concepts and a couple of interesting guests lined up for 2025. So don't worry about that. But I've also moved all of my written content from World Soccer Talk to Bluff City Media. So all the stuff that I used to write for World Soccer Talk about the national teams, attendance, TV ratings, largest crowds of the year, stuff like that, that is now over at Bluff City Media. And if you'll notice, I ended every one of those articles pretty much the exact same way. And that was intentional because we are in the greatest stretch of soccer in American history. You had Gold Cup in 2023. here in the U.S. You had Copa America here in the U.S. in 2024. You have the Club World Cup and the Gold Cup here in the U.S. in 2025. You have the World Cup here in the U.S. in 2026. And you have the Olympics in LA in 2028, which includes men's and women's soccer. We've also got Lionel Messi playing here week in and week out from mid-23 until probably the end of 2025. If soccer's not going to make it now, it might not ever. And that might depend on what your definition of make it is. And hint, hint, this might be a podcast that we're going to be recording here in the next 2 weeks or so. So be on the lookout for that. Little teaser. But with the World Cup, it's my feeling is that it's going to be a rising tide lifts all boats. And so normally it would be, hey, I've been watching the World Cup. The World Cup's here in the U.S. I'm going to go support Atlanta United, or I'm going to go support FC Cincinnati, or the LA Galaxy, or Louisville City, or San Antonio FC, or whoever, right? But we don't have a professional team anymore. My hope had been that 901 FC would have stuck around through 25 and maybe 26, and then seen a boost in support in 26 because of the World Cup, and gotten at least one more year in 27. Did not come to happen, bullet to head. So now the hope is that there are Memphians, the hope for me, and I'm going to bang this drum for the next several years. My hope is that Memphians see the World Cup, get excited about the World Cup, and channel that excitement into supporting the soccer programs at the University of Memphis. Because for me, soccer making it ultimately is more eyeballs on TV and more butts in seats and more kids playing. That's what it's going to boil down to. How you sustain that, for how long, how many, what the exact numbers are, that's all to be determined. And I don't know that I have an answer to that. And that's might be part of what we discuss on the next podcast. So tune in. But in the short term, if you are a Memphian and you have supported the Americans and you have supported 901 FC, who have both abandoned us, and you still want to get out and support soccer, go support the programs at the University of Memphis because they deserve it. The women's teams have finally started to get stable, consistent crowds, and the men's team does lag behind them in that respect. Get out there and give them some support. They're free. If for no other reason than the concession receipts will look much better for the University of Memphis. And they go, wow, we sold a lot of Gatorade and hot dogs and candy bars. But get out there and support them. And hopefully, if we can build enough of a soccer fan base with the University of Memphis Tigers, hopefully at some point, years down the road, professional soccer comes back to Memphis. So that's going to do it for us for the year and for the day here on the 901 Soccer Podcast. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in as much as you have this year. Before we get out of here, I did have a couple of things that I wanted to just throw out to you, one on a personal level and one on a podcast level, both soccer related, so don't worry there. First off, you can find this on Twitter. It's another year for the 901 Soccer Podcast. Average viewership from 2023 to 2024 was up 2%. Not a whole lot, but up is up. It was the best year for the podcast since 2021. And we actually did 14 more episodes of the show this year than we did last year. So you more content, and you were getting more viewers, more episodes, and more views per episode. So that's a good year for me. That's a good year for Bluff City Media, and I have you guys to thank for that. So I really do appreciate that. And I don't know how many episodes or what kind of stuff we're going to do. Like I mentioned, I've got a couple of interesting ideas and guests for the early part of 2025, but after that, I don't know. But rest assured, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to continue to do this podcast and continue to provide written content. And I would appreciate it if you all continue to follow along. On a more personal level, I just wanted to throw this out there. My soccer in 2024, I refereed 188 games in 4 states, Texas, Kansas, Mississippi, and Tennessee. I covered, as a journalist with a credential, I covered 33 games in 6 stadiums in 4 states, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, and Georgia. I wrote 124 soccer articles. I recorded 27 podcast episodes. I made 13 radio appearances on 4 radio stations, and I made 10 other soccer podcast appearances. I don't know that I'm going to be able to match that for 2025, but I will do what I can. So I appreciate all of you for going on this ride with me. I appreciate all of you clicking the links and watching the podcasts and reading the articles and sharing and retweeting and copying and pasting and all of it. I greatly appreciate all of that. That is going to do it for today. That is going to do it for this year. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'm Lawrence Dockery. You can find me on Twitter at LDoc93. You can find the 901 Soccer Podcast on Twitter at 901 Soccer Pod. Bluff City Media on Twitter at BluffCity_media. Search us on Facebook. Just search Bluff City Media and search 901 Soccer. If you are on YouTube watching this, please like the video. Please comment on the video and subscribe to the Bluff City Media channel. And get on over to the Bluff City Media website. Maybe you could become an insider. Maybe you just want to read our content, or you want to buy some merchandise. Any and all are acceptable. So thanks, everybody, for a great year, and we will see you in 2025.